Hi guys, welcome to Counterpoints. My name is Connor. I'm a science fiction, politics, and philosophy nerd, Marine Corps law enforcement veteran, and I would argue a real Republican with Republican values from about a decade ago. We're going to be watching Dave Smith versus Nick Fuentes. These are both relatively controversial figures. Dave Smith is a libertarian. Nick Fuentes is a Christian nationalist, and he is a persona non grata in the mainstream media. So let's see what Nick Fuentes has to say to Dave Fuentes. Dave Smith, the libertarian.
Through years of, kind of like political correctness, the post-war consensus, like all of these things, it's almost like the older generation there was an inability to just say it because it was perceived as racist in order to say it. So there's always code words. It's like we have too much illegal immigration. We have too much of the, we need, and when really what the issue was about was that America was being transformed racially. I mean, that it was being transformed from a majority white country, which it's always been through its entire history, and that's being changed. And it just seemed to me that, like, it's pretty obvious that if you, whatever, like the things the alt-right guys all used to say, if you went to Italy and said, hey, we have some demographic projections, this place is going to be 90% French in a few years. Isn't that wonderful? I think most of them would go, no, that's not wonderful because we want this to be Italy. And so, and you have this drastic change that was completely forced on the American, but there was never a choice. There was never a referendum on, like, should America become a majority minority country? And that referendum wouldn't have done too good in 1960, Like if you had asked those people, or 65, whenever the bill was, if you had asked those people, it would have been, everybody, including all the black people, would have been like, no, we don't, you would have got 99% voting against it. This happened against the will of the Americans. And during that, it's not even like, they're like, hey, the people never asked for this, but we're transforming your society anyway, but we're going to be really cool about it. They didn't even throw that last one in there. They went, you didn't ask for this, it's happening anyway, and fuck you, and everything you hold dear. And also, your son's a girl. Like, it's like on every level. And I think that was guaranteed to create a pushback. And I think it's crazy to not engage with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that's giving the game away way too hard. Anonymous chatter says define majority white. I think they mean non-Hispanic white, like Northern European, which is kind of like annoying to me. Like, let's Google Hispanic real quick. God, I'm such a racist. I'm such a racist. Okay, so just as an example, Hispanic are people from Spain. Right. So then you're talking about Mediterranean Europeans. I would argue while Salma Hayek can appear to be swarthy, you could argue that she's white-ish. This dude looks mestizo, so he's half indigenous, half Spanish. Hi. No, last time I saw scissors was in the left drawer of the bathroom. But anyways. So arguably, like, yeah, this dude's Hispanic, whatever. But, there is such thing as white Hispanic. Like, look at this. Probably Afro-Latina, Hispanic, indigenous, Hispanic, maybe more towards the light side. Afro-Hispanic, white-ish, like Mediterranean, like Spanish white. Probably mestizo, so the whole point of this is like white, brown, whatever. I don't know. Like the whole like anti-Hispanic sentiment, I think is bullshit. I think it's stupid. I think it's silly. And then the other part about it is you just have to deal with this. Birth rate worldwide over since 1800. So if you look at this is just true. In every single region of the world population by level of fertility over time, 1950 to 2010. I think you can go back as far back as like 1900. I think you can go back to 1900. It's just true. Estimated global crude birth rate, that there's two things that seem to correlate with demographic collapse, which is condoms, easy access to birth control, and economic development. Those are the two things that correlate with like the worldwide collapse in the birth rate. Yeah, look at this. India, okay, we all joke about how many Indians there are in the world because there's like 1 billion of them. Look at this. They used to average in 1960, they were at 6 births, and right now they're at 2.5. For the world, the average used to be 5 births. We're now down at 2.5. If you look at the United States, United Kingdom, Russia, Germany, and Japan, these are all nations that developed within the past 100 years, especially since 1960. You can see us all collapsing towards 1.5 to 2 births per person. So you can say like, oh, Hart Celler is so evil because we sold out our country to, mass Hispanic immigration or mass Middle Eastern and North African and Indian immigration. But you have to deal with this, bro. You have to deal with this. Our economic models were going to collapse. So just chalking it up to like, yeah, should we have talked to the American people about demographic collapse? 100%. But does it mean that it was the wrong policy? No. So kind of frustrating to have the libertarian just be like, oh yeah, lol, demographic collapse means that the American, like back when we were 85% Northern European and 15% Black and, 2% Hispanic or whatever, 5% Hispanic and 10% Black. Oh, the Congress sold us out. And that's where a lot of people accuse Dave Smith of being a useful idiot for the far right.
Absolutely. And I agree. That's how I interpreted the Trump revolution. When I was 18 and Trump won the election, and by we, I mean me and my followers at the time or whoever I considered a fellow traveler, we viewed the Trump revolution as an implicit white identitarian movement. And that is what was loaded behind every slogan. Make America great again. Okay, when was America great? Was it great 15 years ago, or are you talking about like the 80s? And what was America like in the 80s? It was a different color, it was a different flavor. We're going to say Merry Christmas again. Okay, what does that mean? Who doesn't say Merry Christmas? Liberals and all these people that practice different religions, Muslims and Jews for that matter, although Trump was always pro-Israel. And we saw Trump as basically just an implicit expression of that, and over time would become more explicit as the changes became sort of ignorable.
Yeah, they thought Trump was their guy. They didn't realize he was a sellout, which is kind of funny.
Demographic changes, the cultural changes. And I do agree with your point, because as someone like myself, these were the conversations I was having as maybe like a higher IQ. Obviously, I'm not just like a resentful, angry white man who doesn't like change. I was looking at this and saying, like you said before, it's not maybe desirable that America changes. You recognize this is in progress. It is happening in
Nightgale Wang says, it even accurate to say majority white since the start. If the 13 colonies in the U.S. took a bunch of land from Mexico, wouldn't those people considered non-white? Nightgale Wing, no. You can fact check me on this, but there's a census. I think the Mexican American War date. So 1846. So California census 1840. So California is one of the biggest states in the union. I think by territory and population and GDP. So when you go to the California census of 1840, this was prior to the war, they're saying like no specific census was done, but the estimate of the Indian population in California in 1840 was not counted by either U.S. or Mexican census, but it's been estimated at 30,000 to 150,000. Bear in mind that the United States made up millions of people already back in the 1800s, and then not just that, like Native American population wouldn't have been considered. But I think the total population of like Mexicans in California was like 3,000. So feel free to like check out the census of like 1850 or 1840 or research that stuff. But I've researched this before, and I effectively found demographic info stating that Mexican settling of California was only a few thousand people. So no.
Some sense has happened. And as maybe a young person, though, and being precocious and also impulsive and immature, I was trying to find the vocabulary and language to talk about these things. And
Right.
I was interested in opinions on this. And I did talk to people at the time who were willing to engage with me. They were few and far between. And they would say, is it really practical, an ethno state? You know, and clearly there's going to be diversity, but how are we going to live with that? How can we preserve some semblance of our way of life? And I feel like if there was more of a recognition that we deserve that we deserve engagement, a conversation, recognition, you know, that our grievances are valid.
Okay. Another thing that pisses me off is the personal level, okay? Where he's like, we deserve this. We deserve to preserve our way of life, okay? What was the way of life in 1960? In my, you know, based off of talking to my parents and talking to, you know, grandparents and stuff and knowing my grandparents, 1960, while they didn't have the same technology as us in reference to cell phones, TVs, smart cars, electronics, electronic entertainment, all that kind of stuff, while they didn't have technology in the same degree, most of life was still the same. You go to your work, you find a job that's, you know, 40 to 60 hours a week. You work your job, you pay your bills, you take care of your family, you go to church. That's pretty much what, like, 99, in my opinion, probably 90% of people did in 1960, was they were just total effing normies. And so Nick, on a personal level, sorry if this rubs you wrong, Justin, but I'm going to say it anyways, is Nick is not a normie, okay? He's not preserving the 1960s style of life, and the 1960s style of life is still available to him. Nick could go to work 40 to 60 hours a week, pay his bills, pay his taxes, find a wife, get pregnant, have a couple of kids. He's a middle-class white Hispanic dude. The middle-class life, or the working class life of 1960, is perfectly available to him. So he's not conserving the culture of 1960s. He's eschewing it. And if you're like, dang, Connor, that's a weird word. How do you spell that? It's ESCHEW. And I'm pretty sure it means to avoid. So yeah, like, I don't know, man. This doesn't hit for me.
And it's okay to not be okay with the things that are happening. Maybe the movement would have taken a different direction, or maybe it wouldn't be so much rage and conflict and division. But it's like you said, people were told, this is the way it's going to be. Your neighborhood is destroyed. It's irreversibly changed. If you have a problem with that.
Destroyed, having a black neighbor, okay? Listen, destroyed. I'm just going to show you two neighborhoods, okay? This is not my neighborhood, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a neighborhood near my neighborhood. Okay, this is Baldwin Park. This was built in the past like 30 to 50 years. There was an old naval base in Central Florida, and the naval base got sold to a developer, and the developer created high density housing. And this is the nice part of town. Okay, so I'm not trying to say this isn't the nice part of town. This is the nice part of town. But look, there's plenty of blacks and Hispanics and Asians who live in this neighborhood, but they're all of the professional middle class. All right, they're all professional, working, not even working class. You can't afford to live here if you're working class. Okay, you can live here if you're rich. But it's like a cosmopolitan rich. So you can be Russian, Ukrainian, Indian, Asian, black, white, Hispanic. As long as you make more than 6 figures, you can live in Baldwin Park. Okay. Now let's go to Orange Blossom Trail, Florida. There's picturesque parts of OBT, and there's really rough parts of OBT. So this would be like the rough parts of OBT. This is probably more. This is probably more the area that we're talking about, okay? And if you go on to the side streets of OBT, you still have houses that were built in the 50s and 60s. But because this is a working class or poor neighborhood that's filled with drugs and prostitutes, you're going to find these kinds of houses. They're houses that were built 50 to 70 years ago. There's a limited amount of maintenance in order to make sure they don't collapse on themselves. There's some boarded up windows. There's street walking prostitutes. There's drugs, there's gun shootings, there's violence, right? And so OBT, maybe the numbered streets, Orlando. But that's where, like, for me, okay, don't live there. There's plenty of other places that you can live besides the numbered streets or OBT in Orlando. This has always been the traditionally black neighborhood. And I'm not saying like traditionally black, like, oh, I'm trying to indict the black community that lives there. But I am trying to say, like, okay, don't live in the rough, shitty part of town. Just move, Fivehead. And even look at this. Detroit is like the symbol of the Rust Belt. Like, it's the symbol of American economic collapse. Downtown Detroit looks nice, but Detroit vacant homes. You know, this is sad to me. It's sad that these places have collapsed and are in economic disrepair, and the few people who do live here effectively have to deal with like rampant crime. But that's also the economy, man. Like American capitalism is a whirlwind of creative destruction. So if you get caught in the whirlwind of creative destruction, you have two choices. You can wallow in the misery of the creative destruction, or you can try to redevelop it into something new and beautiful, or you can move. Those are the three options. This has been true for all of American history. So they're trying to preserve something that's not preservable. It was never preservable.
It's because you're a bad person. If that makes you angry, we're just going to take away your voice. And if you riot, then we're just going to throw you in jail and ruin your life. And it was just kind of like, I said this on my show, doubling down, always doubling down, ignoring intolerance. I know that's like trite at this point, but ironically, you know, the proponents of tolerance were intolerant of anyone that wasn't on board and anyone that didn't look like the new American they wanted to make. And I think that in some sense, maybe my ascendancy in the past couple of years as well, and this is accompanied by and maybe caused it, the Overton window moving to the right on everything, on race, on Israel, on crime, on immigration. Now that people are kind of like banging on the door of the liberal elite saying like, get out, now they're willing to have the conversation. Now they're saying, all right. Okay, maybe we could talk about turning some of this stuff back. And I've said on my show, I just hope this is a moment when there's introspection and we do talk and we find a resolution, because my fear is that we blow right past that and the worst elements with the worst impulses, because they are vindicated in some sense, are going to take control of this, and it is going to be a lot of populist anger.
Cool. Shaved Dog Butt says, good morning, Connor. Doing my first shift at the meat market today. Getting out of deli soon. Based. And then also, thank you, Anonymous Chatter, for the $5. Define majority white. Yeah, again, Northern European. But thank you to Anonymous Chatter for the 20. Thank you to Justin for the 30. Thank you to Anonymous Chatter for the 5. Like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. I parasocially love you. We had a beautiful week, and I'm happy to be hanging out with you guys this morning.
Real resentment, real rage, real hatred, cruelty, because I think that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that, and I completely agree with you. And I think it's a moment that
I completely agree.
That there should be introspection for everybody, like myself included, you and your audience included, and also those liberals. I mean, because it's just, you know, like, and perhaps part of this perspective is just that I'm older than you. Not that I don't need to like play that as a card, but my point of reference, like I was born in the 1980s. And so I was born in 83. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and this was a different country back then, you know? And I think
How, Dave? How? I genuinely want to hear it. And the reason why I want to hear it is because I was born in the 80s. And it was a different country because instead of playing with iPads, kids went outside and they played Foursquare because Game Boys weren't around yet. But then as soon as the late 90s, early thousands rolled around, it wasn't the iPad, it was the Game Boy. It wasn't Roblox, it was Pokemon. You know, we had Pokemon cards and slammers instead of Labubus. We had Beanie Babies instead of Labubus. There was still a massive pop culture. There was still tons of music. There was still tons of movies. There were still tons of films. There was still tons. I think the thing that's changed the most is the internet. I think that's the thing that's changed the most. I think the internet allowed you to consume whatever content you wanted to consume, whether it was entertainment, sports, podcasts, politics. But, you know, while there's a lot of challenges with that, which, by the way, there's a song by Bo Burnham, which is Welcome to the Internet. And I think that song highlights the challenges of the internet perfectly. But while there's a lot of challenges with the internet, I don't think any one of us would really want to live in a world without the internet, because we love the access, we love the freedom, we love the instantaneous access to information, we love building digital communities, we love sharing our interests and having our interests be appreciated by hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not millions of people. So, like, for me, like, what was the big difference? Was it less Hispanics? Yeah, sure, maybe there was like slightly less Hispanics, but I even think in the 90s and the thousands, there were stereotypes about Hispanics being a disproportionate amount of construction and agricultural work. So again, what do you mean, Dave? It was also a doubly more violent place. This is one of the things that actually really pisses me off about like all the doomer bullshit, is that homicide rate since 1990 United States, we cut homicide in half. Do you understand how big of a difference that is? Since like 1960, by the way, since 1960. Do you understand how big of a deal that is? Violent crime in the US. So 1960, this is the violent crime rate. So this is like robberies, robberies, rape, I'm trying to think of what else, and murder. So in 1960, we had substantively less violent crime. Then we hit a peak in 1990. Then we cut homicide in half, but violent crime in general stayed probably close to double, I guess, if you're including like robbery and all that kind of stuff. But our reporting has also gotten substantively better. So yeah, is there an increase compared to 1960? Probably. But I think if you also look at like 1920, there was a shitload of violent crime. So again, this is nothing new. Yeah, and homicide. Look at homicide specifically. Homicide since 1960. We are currently, 2015 to 2020, we had a little bit of a peak during COVID, like a little spike in COVID. But bear in mind, it was like this stayed relatively stable, and then it like spiked a little bit to 2005 levels, and then it went back down during COVID. So once again, where's the dystopia? Where's the collapse? It genuinely fucking pisses me off.
One of the things that's been interesting, I'm really interested to get your point of view on this. One of the things that's been interesting for me about, say, like the cultural transformation, the most recent
eschewing common spelling, so true.
one that we've lived through, where with the woke insanity being rolled back and the censorship being rolled back, which are very related, I think. And I think there's certain things you could point to that were like big moments, like I think the Bud Light and the Target campaigns were like a big moment. Like it was one of the first times that like big corporations got a black eye over this. And even if they gain that money back in their stock, it's like you lose billions of dollars. That starts getting people thinking about this stuff. And then obviously Elon buying Twitter, and then just kind of Zuckerberg wanting to.
Didn't Target take a black eye because they had a bunch of like gay kid outfits, and didn't Bud Light take a hit over the Dylan Mulvaney hit? I think those were the two ones that like hit him with billions of dollars. So it was like too much gay shit for kids, and then associating a frat bro brand with a trans person.
Be cool or whatever it is exactly. The government pressure being taken off. I don't know if we know exactly what it is, but like but one of the things that's been interesting is like, I think from people like my perspective, being 42, is that I think a lot of us were like, oh, good. Like we can go back to not having everything so racialized and having everything so, like just, I just think that stuff's not good. And then, that is not at all what's happened. And in fact, I think,
ask black people what it was like to be black in the 80s and 90s. They would argue, because I have black friends, okay? I would argue that getting away from racialization would be great. However, talk to a black guy about the 80s and 90s who's, 40 or 50 years old. They're going to say, oh, America was always super racialized. Like America was always demeaning and critical of black culture. Like America was always pressuring the black community to simultaneously integrate, but not integrate so much that black people were their neighbors. So for white folks, I'll say it. I think I kind of lived in like a racial bliss for like the first 10 or 20 years of my life. But that's because I was in a white majority community that had its share of Asians, Hispanics, and blacks. and we were the dominant culture. So any microaggression, as the progressives would call it, I could laugh off. Like it's unironically the ha 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 ha, hold on, I'm white meme. Like, hold on, this is probably from like 10 years ago now. Boondocks. Oh wait, I'm white. I think this captured it perfectly.
Let's see how a nigga moment affects a white man.
Okay, I didn't say the N-word. That was Riley, okay?
Prick. Watch where you walking, bitch.
What did you... Wait a minute. I'm white.
Where you going? Don't you ignore me. This is a perfectly good moment to throw your life away.
A big misconception about the nigga moment is that it can be avoided by simply moving away from niggas. If only it were that easy. See, niggas always got a new trick right around the corner.
All right, so I disavow, you using the N-word with
Let's
the
see
A.
how a nigga moment...
However, the Boondocks was describing like a real sociological like event. And what they were describing, in my opinion, with that N-word moment saga, is they were describing like, two young black men, for those of you who haven't seen the original cartoon, two young black men bump into each other, and because there's like an honor code almost, they have to beef. And so as a result, like, oh, you stepped on my shoes, you bumped into me, this, that, the other. There's this expectation that through male machismo, they can allow a super small thing like bumping into each other to escalate to homicidal violence. Whereas with white people, because their bills are paid, their taxes are paid, their kids are going to the right school, they're relatively healthy, they have a decent life expectation, et cetera, that if there's a minor inconvenience where you bump into somebody or somebody bumps into you and they're rude, then you can laugh it off because the rest of your life is relatively good. You don't have to, you don't have to throw your life away to defend your honor in a stupid beef over something that's relatively irrelevant, because everything else in your life is relatively fine. And so I think that's kind of I don't know. I think it's just kind of true that white folk in the 80s and 90s, maybe even the thousands, besides like jihadist terrorism and crime, if it didn't affect you, you could just laugh it off, relatively speaking.
Like it's been kicked into higher gear. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot with that is that, it's probably just from my perspective, being my age, it's much easier for me to go, all right, let's just go back to like what the before time, when before this woke insanity, things weren't that crazy, at least culturally. Whereas I think your audience, and part of mine, but more so your audience, which is younger, naturally, they lived through it in a different way than I ever did, and they're, you think about like that, what was the kid's name? Sandman, Nicholas Sandman.
Oh, yeah.
The guy, they tried to ruin this kid's life for the crime of being an angel. I mean, dude, Nick, man, I am lucky that there wasn't social media or podcasting or any like shit when I was a kid. But I remember saying on that shit, man, if me and my friends, when we were teenagers, if those black Israelites, because we were just little fucking hooligans from Brooklyn, like we were like, if they had come up and started talking all that shit to us, and the neighbor, you guys are colonizers, we would have immediately been like, that's right, bitch. Yeah, we took your shit, didn't we? Right. Oh yeah, you raped our women. Oh, and you didn't do shit. Like we would have just immediately started talking shit back to them. It would have probably been a fight. This kid does nothing. Just a Catholic kid who's like in there for a ride. So he just smiles. He just stands there and smiles. And they tried to ruin his life over that. And I think, for a lot of people that you talk to, these are like, I'm not saying they were black people growing up in the Jim Crow South, but they really were. They really did come up under a system that was overtly bigoted against them. Where it was like, hey, it is the law of the land that you will be denied opportunities. We're looking to put women and people of color and everything except you, straight white man. We're looking at everything else. Your university hates your guts. Hollywood hates your guts. The media, the political class. And it's a big ask after all of that when you get the leg up to go, can you be cool now? And so I understand where that's a tough thing, to ask. At the same time, I do think, as you mentioned, we're not going to live in a white ethno state. The 1960, we can't go back to 1965 and undo the Immigration Act. And this is going to be a multiracial society of some sort. And we ought to think about, like, okay, how do we move forward in a way that's conducive to peace and prosperity, which
clearly white nationalism. Dude, okay, so this is where Dave Smith doing the Dave Rubin, like, I agree meme is a little bit frustrating. At this point, I feel like if Dave Smith wasn't a total fucking tool, he would start pressing Nick, and he would be like, yeah, like, we got a lot of social problems. Like, I understand why white people are pissed off. This is the cultural shift over the past 20 or 30 years. I understand social justice warriors were really annoying. However, how is white nationalism the solution? Because if anything, it seems like resegregation would require state intervention. It sounds like isolation would create ethno-religious enclaves that would probably resent the other ethno-religious enclaves surrounding them. How is resegregation, both cultural, religious, and racial and ethnic, how is that the solution to our current problems? But I for some reason, I'm just suspecting that Dave Smith is not going to ask that question or press Nick seriously on why Christian nationalism with race realism / ethno-nationalism is the solution. I have a feeling he's not going to press.
is kind of what we all on some level want.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, because I guess it comes down to multiracialism itself, because we do live in different America. There was, I'm told, the consensus in the 90s and the early noughts where people describe race relations as generally good. And, we could talk about why that is. I mean, people say that that's only after there was this intense anti-crime intervention, the crime bill and Giuliani and stop and frisk and all that. But people say things are pretty good. But America was also a lot less diverse. And so we've undergone this political transformation. And on the other side of it, we do have a much different America. And the question is, now that we really do have like these large groups of different races in the country, can there be a brand new political order that's based on understanding? And it comes down to the question of that in itself. And to me, all these little things that they were talking about 20 years ago or 10 years ago, representation, microaggressions, opportunity, it's really about power. That's ultimately what it comes down to. It's about who will predominate, who will be preeminent. When you're talking about, for example, DEI, that's saying we want the spots at Harvard because you know who is scouting Harvard talent? The biggest corporation.
Justin says, so you had an amazing upbringing being with your own people and you don't want to preserve that, Connor? At the risk of self-doxing, what ended up happening was I live in a nice neighborhood with decent public schools. I'll admit that. But I went to public school. Went to private school during various points in my educational career, but that wasn't because I was trying to get away from ethno-religious minorities. That was because I was behaving poorly. But my town has a it has a wrong side of the tracks. I'll put it that way. And so I had kids from the wrong side of the tracks. And there was also a majority black neighborhood near me that also had kids who came into our school because their parents wanted their kids to have a better education. And so, no, it wasn't ethno-religiously identical. It wasn't. There were still Indian kids. There were still Asian kids. There was still a large, probably proportional population of black students. So no, it wasn't all white. It wasn't all upper middle class white. Also, even amongst like the whites, so to speak, with the whites, there was also like a broad cross section of economics within the white section. There was like the upper middle class kids who all wore like polos and khakis and loafers, and they were going to go to college and get a graduate. They already knew that they were going to get like a graduate degree, and then they were going to follow daddy and mommy into the family businesses. There was like that whole class of kids. And then there were like the middle class kids who were fucking around. And then there was like the working class kids who like to smoke pot and skateboard and ride BMX bikes and listen to punk pop music and all that kind of stuff. So no, it wasn't an ethno-religiously, materially singular culture. So yeah, I don't agree with that characterization, Justin.
Law firms, and we want to be in the law firms. We want to be on the boards of the biggest companies because we want power.
Right.
And we want power to help ourselves. We want that for Black people. We want that for Hispanics, for Asians. And so it does come down ultimately to power sharing. And power sharing and even wealth sharing, it comes down to the distribution or allocation of resources. It's contentious because whites are necessarily losing power. They used to have all of it, and now they're sharing it. Now they're going to have half of it or a quarter of it. And what's more is if another group has power over you, there's like an inherent suspicion because it's like, well, this guy's not really looking out for me because he doesn't look like me and he didn't come from where I came from and he's not like me. And the problem with this is after there's so much conflict, the non-whites don't trust whites. And the whites are rightly skeptical of the non-whites because the non-whites seem to have license to hate whites. Non-whites have like inherent distrust, basically like a veiled hatred and resentment. And they feel completely able to express that. And so the fundamental question is how now do the races share power in a way that isn't contentious? How do we find an understanding? And I don't know if that's even possible because the concern from the alt-right was always, in particular in a democracy, in an open society, when politics gets racialized, it basically just becomes like a race war. Yeah. It turns into like a soft form of a racial war. And, now they're saying woke right. I think the reason they're doing that, and they want to, just kind of get rid of identity politics and find a consensus, is because they want for the whites now not to fight the non-whites. They want a situation where, like you said, we're going to have happy liberal whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians all living together. I just don't know how possible that is at this point. And that's where people start to talk about, can we disintegrate? We were forcibly integrated with immigration and after Civil Rights Act. Can we now go our separate ways? I don't know that that's actually even a good thing, though. I don't know that that's even.
What? What? Damn, is Nick scared of getting shot? I seriously thought a whole huge part of his platform was like Christian nationalism, where Christianity is the supreme identifier over racialism. But then racialism is also a huge part of the America First movement, where you have to be race realist. You just have to acknowledge all the disparities and differences and dysfunctions of every racial category. And then ultimately you need to push for, at minimum, cultural and social segregation, if not legal segregation. So hearing him say this is kind of throwing me for a loop.
Even like a good answer. But I would say where it starts is just with honesty. Ultimately, there's got to be a recognition that there are legitimate grievances on both sides, and there are illegitimate grievances.
Right.
There are legitimate voices expressing those grievances that actually, because I said this on the Charlie Kirk show, after Charlie got shot, I think there was a real threat of like war. I think there still is, because left-wingers are shooting people and blowing stuff up, and eventually a right-winger is going to retaliate, and then is it going to be like the 60s and 70s? That's a question. But I said on my show after Charlie died, the important thing is, let's get a new consensus of people that don't want that, that don't want war, that don't want their opponents to die, that
damn, Nick Fuentes is becoming a grill hottest.
Don't want to murder each other. I said, I'm Christian. I don't believe in murder. I don't believe in revenge. I said, and not all people are Christian, and not all Christians believe that, actually. And so I think moving forward, there needs to be an uncomfortable coming together of people that have grievances, legitimate grievances with each other, but who both want harmony, want to live in peace, don't want bloodshed. Leaders from both sides to come together.
Oh my God, it's like he's rediscovering liberalism. Nick, you idiot, that's liberalism. My God, I'm going to kill myself. Nick the Knife Fuentes, the king of the dissident right, rediscovering liberalism. What a fucking asshole. Sorry for getting so mad and sorry for cussing so much. Okay. Here's white people, here's black people, here's Hispanic people, here's Asians, here's Muslims, here's I don't even know, like, another category of people. What's another category of people? Here's Native Americans. Okay. All right. Liberalism. It's so what a dick. What a dick. Sorry, Justin. Sorry to burst your fucking bubble. God, I'm furious right now. I'm furious to hear Nick Fuentes rediscover liberalism. Oh my God, what a dick. Okay. Whites. Oh, Jews. Can't forget the Jews, okay? Jews. Blacks. Hispanics. Asian. Native American. All right, and then I'm just going to start typing in like stereotypes of each group. But I'm also going to type in so here's what we ask you to do in capital L liberalism. Work your job. Take care of family / community. Pay bills, pay taxes. Vote politics to resolve differences. Okay, this is what liberalism demands of each category of human being. And by the way, there's like another billion categories of human beings. Okay, so this is what liberalism demands of you. It doesn't demand fealty. It doesn't demand you love and care about every person and every other demographic group. This is what liberalism demands of you. Okay? It's actually just that fucking simple. And then let's say that we acknowledge all of our separate problems. So let's just acknowledge some problems, some tensions between the ethno-religious groups. All right? Give me a second. Nick Fuentes becoming a fucking liberal pisses me off so much. It really does. It makes me so mad. So some white folks are Catholic. Well, actually, most of them are probably Protestant, right? Catholic, atheist, Protestant, Catholic, atheist. Sometimes they're racist. Sometimes they're annoying progressives. And so that's like some of the tensions within the white community is that there's religious differences, that sometimes they're racist and sometimes they're annoying progressives. Then Jews, constantly afraid of being attacked and slaughtered. And so they go for like high achievement in order to try to integrate into society at the highest level, so they're not slaughtered. Black folk, disproportionate crime rates, sometimes integration issues related to slavery history, racist history. Okay, Hispanics. Catholic, so mostly Catholic, drug cartels, and then immigration. Asian, I would say a lot of Asians are like honorary whites because they're so high achieving and they're also really reclusive. So I would say like honorary whites and then enclaves. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, in Chinatown or Little Vietnam, there are ethnic enclaves in those communities where they just don't even speak English. They still speak exclusively Chinese or exclusively Korean. And then Native Americans, I would say alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, legacy of colonialism. So the whole point is, all right, sorry for taking a little bit in order to draw that out. But I want to acknowledge that there's real problems in the United States with our and this is just like a cursory look. This isn't even like the most complicated analysis of the tensions between the various kinds of people within America. This is a very cursory analysis. But Protestants, Catholics, and atheists can fight about religion. Whites can fight about like racism and how racist you should be that's justified, or you should be anti-racist or whatever. And there's plenty of annoying progressives within the white category. For Jewish folks, no offense, it's kind of a stereotype, but I think it's true, that since a third of the international Jewish population was wiped out 2 generations ago, they're a little bit scared of the fact that when there's crazy ethno-religious tensions in a country, that they get targeted and wiped out. So as a result, Jews, even if they look European, even if they look white, they're kind of treated in an otherized way, because Jews will often fight for social justice causes for Black folk, Hispanic folk, Asian folk, Native Americans, and for Jewish folk. So they're kind of viewed as an other within the white category. Then for Black folk, we have disproportionate criminality issues. There's integration issues related to the history of slavery. And then Hispanics are mostly Catholic. There's the drug cartel problem. There's the immigration issues. Then for Asians, they're honorary whites, but they create ethno-religious enclaves that kind of keep them separate from everybody else. And then Native Americans, all the depression and drug issues and the legacy of colonialism. So these are real tensions. These are real problems within American society. However, liberalism, it's like, oh, maybe we just need to go along in order to get along. Maybe we need to create a coalition of all Americans who believe that we should, solve our issues at the political level. Do you know what that's called? It's called fucking liberalism. It's maximal human freedom with some caveats. The caveats are work your job, pay your bills, take care of your family and community, and use politics, representative democracy, and republicanism in order to resolve your political differences. Nick Fuentes is a fucking liberal. This pisses me off to no fucking degree. Holy shit. All it took was Charlie Kirk getting shot in the neck for Nick Fuentes to become a fucking liberal. God damn it. Sorry for taking the Lord's name in vain, but this is infuriating. Nick Fuentes is a effing liberal. That's upsetting.
But I'm not optimistic. I think that the most cynical, calculating people rise to the top. They will incite and exploit the divisions and try to vie for control. And I think, conflict is more likely than peace at this point.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to keep those because it's so easy. It's so easy, And by the way, just because you mentioned it, and I did say this publicly a bunch, but I really did appreciate your episode after Charlie Kirk. Thank you for that. I was on Piers Morgan debating that Brandon Tatum, the cop guy, and that was what he said, I was a terrible person for giving you credit for that show. And then his whole argument was like, he's like, Nick is disingenuous. Like, he doesn't mean that. And it's just like, whatever. I didn't even spend that much time on it in the thing, but it was just funny. It was like in my head, I was like, wait, so in your worldview, like Nick is this disingenuous, he's the leading neo-Nazi. It's like, okay, so the leading neo-Nazi is calling for peace? Like, is that not, could we at least acknowledge that's preferable to like the other outcome? But on the broader topic, I agree with your assessment, unfortunately, that it's kind of less likely that this has a positive.
Yeah, Christian says, Nick has distanced himself from more violent far-right neo-Nazis who thinks he's an Hispanic fed. He knows in a war he will be eliminated and the Groypers are essentially just racist DGG. Yup.
Outcome than a negative one. But I do think that, I look at it like I was born in 1983, which, to me does not feel like that long ago. I still feel like you, man, except my knees. My knees really don't feel like you. But, so I was born in 1983. This is 20 years, less than 20 years, 19 years after the Civil Rights Act, right? So it's like, it kind of does make sense in a way that perhaps there was like a different outlook only 20 years after the Civil Rights, and now it's 2025. Like, this is actually quite a bit.
Yeah, key code, a liberal who believes in white replacement. Yeah, unironically.
Further, this is 60 years after the Civil Rights Act now. And I do think that, like, in order to move forward, the only way to do this would be to declare, man, I hate saying this word, but actual equality of some sense. Like, it would actually have to be like, look, nobody's getting discriminated against under the law. Either nobody has a right to have.
Numinax for $10 says, I get this weird feeling that Justin Bezos. No, that's too rude. No. Numinax, rude. I disavow.
You know, their special, their group interest, their group idea, or everybody gets to do it. You know, now, like I think the way it worked, like when I was a kid, it's almost like there was a gentleman's agreement, like, and there was a gentleman's agreement where it was kind of like, look, we know like bad things happened to minorities in this country in the past, and so we're not going to say, you know, like some of the things that we obviously know, and we'll even allow you to say a little bit about us. And that was kind of the gentleman's agreement, and at a certain point, it was like the progressive left particularly just broke this gentleman's agreement. And they were like, well, no, we're going to say everything that we want to say. And then eventually I feel like, you know, the young white men were kind of like, okay, well then screw it. So then there's no gentleman's agreement anymore.
Right.
And, you know, I remember, I remember, I'm sure you saw this when Scott Adams had that comment a couple years ago, I guess it was, that went super viral. Scott Adams, who's unfortunately is, I think, very sick these days. Me and him have argued a few times on Twitter, but I was sad to hear that. But he said the thing, he was like, my advice to white people is just don't be around blacks. Like, just move away, move to a different neighborhood where they're not there. And I remember first hearing that and going like, yo, that's fucked up, dude. And then like the second after I went, oh, that's fucked up, I went, this is exactly what I did. That is exactly what I did.
Sorry, hold on. What did Dave Smith do?
But he said the thing, he was like, my advice to white people is just don't be around blacks. Like, just move away, move to a different neighborhood where they're not there. And I remember first hearing that and going like, yo, that's fucked up, dude. And then like the second after I went, oh, that's fucked up, I went, this is exactly what I did. That is exactly what I did. You know, I mean, I remember me and my wife were looking at the town that we ultimately moved to, and it's just like there was like a grading thing, you know, when you look at towns and they're like schools, A+, like this, A+, this, A+, crime, A+, this, A+, and they go diversity, D-. And I was like, cool. Like, I mean, and it's not like I don't care, but it's like those other things are important to me, and they do seem to be attached to this one. And so it's like, I think in order to kind of put this fire out, there would have to be some type of system where it's like, look, like white people are they can't be discriminated against under the law, and they can't be discriminated against in other ways either, and they have to also be allowed to say what they want to say. Then to your point, there are legitimate grievances that black people have. I mean, there is no, and this is my own bias, I guess, but much of it doing with government policy is almost everything that's handed to them from the state is absolute garbage, and their schools are really bad, and you know, there's like legitimate grievances there. I also think like welfare has done enormous damage. But you kind of can't just blame all your problems on white people and racism. I mean, that actually is not really what's holding black people back in this country. And I think we have to be honest about that if we don't want things to go in an ugly direction.
Yeah, well, and you know, I would say that a lot of what occurred under wokeism, I don't think it was all bad necessarily, because I think that.
Listen, guys, I understand that you guys are like, wait, you can be a segregationist liberal, you can be an ethno-religious supremacist liberal, you can be a racist liberal. And weirdly enough, I think you can. You have to bear in mind the liberal tradition is like, what, 200, 300 years old? And so it was emanating from like English Enlightenment philosophy. I'm pretty sure the English Enlightenment philosophers from 200 years ago probably would have been okay with separate but equal like racial status within a government. So whether or not it was truly equal, that was kind of the argument that ended separate but equal. Whether or not it was truly equal is a different argument. They probably would have been okay with that. So when I'm talking about liberal, I'm not talking about like the modern resident of Brooklyn, New York, who is not a revolutionary communist, but they're still a hipster, who is like a xenophile, right? Xenophobia is used to describe when you're like afraid and irrationally hostile to the alien. A xenophile is somebody who is like desperately in love with whatever is alien. Like, have you guys ever seen this? I don't really want it to get copyright struck, so I probably won't watch the clip. But hold on, there's this show called Atlanta, and I only watched the first season. Atlanta, have you been to the mother country? There's this like super funny, fucked up episode where Atlanta dinner party scene. And this chick is Donald Glover. Man, Atlanta TV series. I'm just going to describe it in a second because I don't want to get copyright struck. But there's this scene. It's not this one. They go to this, like, really, it's this one. It's this episode. They go to this rich guy's house who lives in Atlanta, and he has like all these collected African statues. Atlanta TV series, African statues. And it's like the whitest guy you've ever seen in your entire life. And he's talking about like, oh man, like, and like Donald Glover is just like a random kid from the hood who grew up in Atlanta, who's trying to hustle his way out of the hood. And he's got a hip hop friend and an attractive baby mama and all this kind of stuff. And so they go to this dinner party. And then this white guy is like, you know, dang, have you ever been to Africa? Do you know the mother tongue? Have you ever been to the mother country? Have you ever been to the motherland? And he's just like very wokely being a xenophile. And so I don't think you need to be a xenophile to be a liberal, as much as that's the stereotype. I'm sorry for yapping so much, but it's such an iconic scene. And if you want to see like how black folk are under, in my opinion, you know, obviously I'm a white dude talking about this as if I know shit about fuck, but the whole, if you want to see like a black dude be uncomfortable, but not freak out and not be like soy about it, I think Atlanta is perfect. I think Atlanta actually goes through like the American black experience without being soy. Anyways.
You know, as I get older, I do recognize it's sort of funny. Like when I was a teenager, we were getting called racist for everything. Everything was racist, everything. And I feel like a lot of people started out saying, what? How's that racist? I remember used to, like you said earlier, if you called them black and not African-American,
Right.
in like 2012, that was a problem. Or call.
Thank you, Jesus. Scott Adams was discussing a poll that said 72% of American black people say it's not okay to be a white person. Call them ableist slurs, Chuck E. Cheese. Whoever answered that way, call them ableist slurs. And what's going to happen is half of the people who took that poll are going to have actually like a racist sentiment. And then half of those people who took that poll are going to have that like social justice warrior progressive thing. Have you guys ever heard the steel man? I'll steel man it for you. I don't even know if the paint is going to help, but I'm in a yapping mood, even though my brain isn't working because I'm tired from last night, but I'm in a yapping mood, so I'm going to yap. Okay, so we have a white dude, and obviously, like, white is like a melanin content of your skin. They're talking about Northern Europeans when they're talking about whites, right? And then we got a black dude, okay? So half of the people who answered that poll and they said it's not okay to be white, they're not saying that you can't have white melanin in your skin. What they're saying, sure, let's be a little bit racist and let's go brown. Okay, so what they're saying is that there's a concept called whiteness that was established within the past 400 years. And it was proximity to European culture. So it's music and it's art and it's architecture and it's statues and it's timeliness and it's industrialization and it's all this bullshit, right? It's all this bullshit associated with being Northern European. And when you're black, you kind of have like a cultural choice. You can either integrate and be closer to whiteness, be closer to European tradition, be closer to the Enlightenment, be closer to this, be closer to that. Or you can try to say, well, actually, there's probably three options. You can say, well, this isn't my mother culture. This is, you know, I was kidnapped from another continent. Therefore, I want to try to understand blackness. And so they study the history and culture and traditions and music of Africa. That's like actually, if you were looking at the two ways that you could travel within this paradigm, then proximity to whiteness would be proximity to European culture, and proximity to blackness would be proximity to African culture. And so you can travel within that direction. But what a lot of people do, what I've heard a lot of black folk do, is they say, well, there's some redeemable aspects of European culture that have been integrated into American culture. There's some redeemable aspects of African culture. However, I was kidnapped and moved to, not me, this hypothetical black person. I was kidnapped and brought to this continent not of my will, and Africans in the United States of America have created their own thing. They've become, they're ethnogenetic. They've created their own ethno-religious culture. And so as a result, rather than being subservient to the European dominant culture, rather than trying to LARP as a African, they would rather create their own thing in the middle, which is just being African American and having like an independent culture. I say all of this because the other thing that if you're going for the sociological steel man of being white is not okay, rather than the actual just like racist statement, is the fact that we should abolish culturally our proximity to Europeans and our proximity to Africans, and we should just be people. We shouldn't even conceptualize proximity to European history or European culture. We shouldn't even conceptualize proximity to Africa or African history. We should just abolish the entire dynamic and just be human beings in America. So that's where I'm going to say probably half of the people that answered that question, whiteness, blackness, spectrum, half of the people who answered that question are probably just fucking racist. And half of the people who answered that question probably have some 3,000 IQ, abolish whiteness, sociological take.
Colored instead of person
I would actually be super curious to hear you guys' response to that in chat.
Of color, whatever, and he'd say, I don't hate anybody for their race. I feel like people have kind of gone full circle, and now 10 years later, people are like, they actually hate non-white people and go, yeah, I'm racist, so what? And I don't know, I feel like maybe that's a mistake.
Yeah, you were a big part of that, Nick.
In a sense. I mean, I've said I'm racist, but like actually genuinely harboring racial hatred is bad. I think it's good as a society we move past that. I think it's good as a society we move past a lot of prejudice. And I think I agree that the new consensus just needs to be, just like you said, that basic conception of fairness, equality. And it really comes down to specificity with the language. Like everyone now talks about, are you racist? Are you not racist?
Sorry, Jung and Ark says, yes, I'm racist. Yes, I'm liberal. Yes, we exist. Liberals in the 1920s. So true, dude.
I say, yeah, I'm a little racist. I think everyone's a little racist. Yeah, we're all a little prejudiced, and we all believe in stereotypes. And what does that even really mean? But do I believe in cruelty, hatred, violence? No. And I usually like to use those words because anyone who knows me, the number one racist, knows I'm not a cruel person. I'm not a hateful person. I'm not a violent person.
Oh, Gen X says that Atlanta is an amazing show. You would love Dear White People, at least the first season. Amanda Sealis, your favorite Jubilee episode was in it. Dude, guys, hold on. I have to share this. I have to share this because I need to be woke, okay? So, Dear White People movie. I'm going to share my love of the Dear White People movie. When this movie came out, so many people were so fucking pissed without actually watching the movie. This movie is hysterical. It's so good. And what I mean by that is it actually goes through, it goes through like historically black college or university. It goes to an HBCU. And what happens I don't know if this is a TV show or the movie because I haven't watched it in a while. But this chick that's on your screen right now, she's like a black radical. She talks about like ethno-segregation, the power of the white people, how they're dominating society, how, white people are colonizing people. But in the movie at least, she has like a white boyfriend, like a normie white boyfriend. And she is like constantly having cognitive dissonance between her radical black identity and her white boyfriend. And she's just like ripping herself apart at the seams, trying to keep this identity going. Then when it comes to, I don't really recognize any of these other people, but this guy has one of the biggest arcs in the story where he's gay, but he's closeted gay because he knows there's a shitload of homophobia within the Black community. And so he's torn between his loyalty to his Black identity and his homosexual identity. And so he constantly has to hide his homosexuality. And there's this like bubbling tension between his Black identity and his homosexual identity. And then at the end of the series, there's like something like a bunch of white people do blackface at like a sorority party or something like that. And so they all freak out. And so you see him kind of like shed his homosexual identity temporarily in order to participate in his Black identity, which is effectively vandalizing the racist sorority fraternity party. And then there's, I don't know if it's this guy, but just bear in mind, I'm describing it. There's this guy, I think, in the movie, who is like the son of the dean or something like that. And so he's constantly pulled in the direction of like Black power, but like enlightened Black power, where you have to be educated, you have to be smart, you have to be well-spoken. And if you speak ghetto, act ghetto, eat ghetto food, date ghetto girls, then effectively like you're a barbarian. And so this movie is called Dear White People, as if it was like some kind of like racist critique of white people, but it's almost anything but. It's effectively like an internal critique of Black culture in struggle with a white majority culture. It's actually like, it's fascinating. It's a fantastic movie. So I actually, even if you're racist, even if you're like a giga conservative who like hates racial lectures, I actually invite you to watch it because it's like hilariously fucked up and nuanced how crazy the identities of all of the characters are not integrated. They're not integrated at all. You think this is like a Black war cry for Black identity? It's not. It's effectively showing all of the vulnerabilities and fragility of Black identity in 10 different ways. There's also this, sorry, real quick, I'll wrap it up. But there's this chick, I don't know if it's her in the movie or not, but there's this chick who is trying to constantly act white. She's trying to be sophisticated, have her hair, you know, straightened. She's constantly playing to like white aesthetic stuff, but she's like a very Black woman. But she's constantly playing to like the white male gaze, trying to be as attractive as possible to white culture. But then she realizes that she's just being tokenized and used. And so she has self-hatred for being tokenized and used. So yeah, dude, like strong recommend. I don't know about the TV series, but the movie was fantastic. Simon Simple says, we'll always be able to speak on behalf of groups that don't move in then. True. Fung Dark says, Anita Sarkeesian did say the thing. True. Newmanax for 10 says, explain how segregation is liberal if it's likely state-enforced separation of races. I'm confused. It's probably not liberal in a maximalist sense, meaning that like, if you think that liberalism is a maximal personal freedom, then segregation is not maximally liberal. But if you view liberalism as a spectrum in which you're trying to maximize human freedom, but you dial it in, you could probably have a segregationist, separate but equal liberal society. It's not maximally liberal, but you could still have a liberal society that's like racially segregated.
Unless I'm put in a self-defense situation at my front door, you know, let's say, because that is, you know,
Forgot about that.
Tends to happen, you know. And I think that as a country, we could survive being racist. We can't survive like ontologically hating each other and not wanting
Unironically true.
the best for each other and wanting to kill and destroy each other. And that's why I think it's really important. It's like I said after that show, like we are going to need to fight. I do believe there is going to need to be like an intense political battle. And people are going to need to choose what side they're going to be on. And what side I'm not on is the side where someone gets shot in the neck and you celebrate, or someone gets stabbed in the neck with a knife and you make excuses for it, or even in Gaza, people are being blown to smithereens and you say, give them hell, they deserve it, whatever. It's like we need to find a way where, and I'm Christian, of course, but We need to take most of the right and some of the left, even, against the kind of nihilistic element on the far left, because I really believe they are the problem. I think they are driving a lot of the issues here.
Sorry, did he say the Jews or did he say progressives?
The right and some of the left, even, against the kind of nihilistic element on the far left.
Ah, nihilism.
Because I really believe they are the problem. I think they are driving a lot of the issues here.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I do agree with you that there was something, you know, it was one of those examples that really pushes you up to the limit of like speech versus inciting violence. But like, there's something like, dude, there was just a major political assassination. This is a dangerous moment for this country, and you're just making a video about how great it was, and that, and I 100% agreed with your take. I think it was on Greenwald or Patrick Bet David, one of those two shows, where you were just like, yeah, they should get fired from their job, and like, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, there is a level, and yes, you do have to like. You have to work out your own hierarchy of moral outrages or whatever. But again, it's sometimes these things are somewhat arbitrary. I shouldn't even say, I guess exactly where you draw the line feels kind of arbitrary. You know, in the same way, like we all know, like, okay, a 6-year-old can't drive a car, but a 25-year-old has to be able to, like, I don't know, there's somewhere you got to draw the line. And like, if a woman is getting fired for posting all lives matter, that's insane. But like, if you're getting fired for, it's like, I don't know. You know, I had a friend of mine, a buddy of mine, who made he got fired from his job because he made a video singing Kanye West's Heil Hitler song, and it was like, well, yeah, dude, you know, like, I don't know, like, yeah, a lot of employers are gonna look at that and be like, yeah, dude, I can't have people do that, and that's not nearly as bad as celebrating someone who just got murdered. By the way, I know you're friends with Kanye. Gotta say, dude, I Kanye's album College Dropout spoke to my soul. It was the year I dropped out of college. He made this album, College Dropout. And I always loved, there's this one really beautiful song on there called Family Business. And I heard it earlier today. And man, it hits different after Cousins. The whole story is about his cousin. And I always thought it was such a nice song. But after Cousins, you're like, man, this one has a whole different tone to it. Anyway.
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show.
Let's not. So anyways, I'll react to this more depending on how hot it is, but I actually have to move into a Valor React segment. So I'm going to respond to you guys real quick, and I'm just going to say, listen, I'm happy to a degree. All right. I'm happy that Nick seems to be politically maturing. I'm happy that he seems to be more considerate and he doesn't want war. But it's hard to hear him say that kind of shit when he's like, oh, the racial animus, the nihilism, the black pill, the radicalization. It's like, you were a big part of that, bro. Like, you got tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of radicalized, angry, pissed off, nihilistic young men. And you were a big part of that. So I'm happy that you're changing direction a little bit. But at the same time, it's like, you profited from it. And now that you see that it actually leads to violence, and now you're running away from it. Like the stream, share it with your friends, engage with chat, super chats if you got them, memberships if you got them. Thank you for your viewership. Thank you for your financial support. I parasocially love you.